This presentation is all about building solid. Building solid is a hand building technique where, you guessed it, you build solid. Building solid is a really wonderful way of making anything that you want a lot of gesture in or is difficult, like a really difficult form. Building solid is going to take a little time because there are a few steps and you are going to have to let things firm up between your steps. This presentation is broken down into 5 parts. Part 1 is making a maquette. Maquettes are a great way to figure out your form. Part 2 is building the core because you need something to stabilize your work as you build. Part 3 is building the work. Part 4 is cutting the work in half or as many parts as you need to and carving it out. Because remember, in clay, we can't have anything that's really over an inch thick, but in this class, we like to stay 1/4 of an inch. Part 5 is putting the work back together and finishing it off with texture and details. Making maquettes. Maquettes are just 3D sketches. So these are even a little bit different than a 3D model because a model is going to have detail and it's going to kind of be the small version of what is to come. A maquette is more of a sketch. So you can brainstorm by doing maquettes, and they're a great way of working, especially if you know you're going to be building solid, because in a sense it's kind of the same. But it gets your form down really fast, and it gets it down 3-dimensionally, which is different than a sketch. If you're like me, I don't have the greatest drawing skills. I can sculpt my butt off, but I don't draw very well. And so it's hard for me to understand 3-dimensionally what something is going to look like. So maquettes are a great way to work. It also gives you an idea of where your balance is going to be. So if you know that you're going to do something that's cantilevering or anything that is really gestural and kind of going off, this will help you figure out how to do that without it falling over. So stability is going to happen. They're also really great for understanding how something hits the table. And you know, it's always nice too, and I always tell my students, step away from your work and kind of rotate it and see what things look like, because we get really close and focused in on our work. So you can do that with a maquette, and you can do that before you spend weeks building something, and then you realize like, oh, that just doesn't look right at all. So maquettes, wonderful, wonderful. In order to make a maquette, you're just going to grab clay out of your bag. These do not have to go into the kiln, so it doesn't matter. You can just take your clay and add to it, if you need to. So you're playing with it like Play-Doh. You're just going to shape it in your hand and move the clay around until you get something that you like. Now, if you don't even know where to start and you just have no idea about what you want your work to look like, take some clay and just start playing with it. I have no idea what I want this to look like. So I'm just kind of, in real time, putting this together. In order to build solid, I mentioned this again, but in order to build solid, you really want volume, and volume is going to be kind of a thickness, or it's going to take up more space than something really thin like that. So thin areas, trying to get you to see, thin areas, if you were doing a whole sculpture like that, there's a better way of doing that than actually building solid. But building solid is a great way to have something that has a little bit of volume to it. Okay, so for the sake of demo, I'm going to say my maquette is done. Now, you could say, okay, that's my maquette, because it does give you an idea of how something is going to sit on the table. I'm going to have a hard time stopping because it's not so you can kind of look at things, see how they sit on the table, see if something is cantilevered over a little bit. But also what's really nice about a maquette is if you're like, I don't like what's happening here. It just isn't right. Well, guess what? You can just rip it off and you can put it at a totally different angle and just smear it in and see if maybe you like that better. Ooh, now I have a little twist. That's a little bit more interesting than what I had before. So don't be afraid to do that. So that's totally more interesting. And I can come in here and I can twist it more if I need to. Okay. I'm not worrying about how this looks because I want to move on from here, but let's say that's my maquette. Made my 3 maquettes. They're very different forms because I want to show you something, but these are pretty simple. This one I've obviously spent more time on. You can see that. This one has a lot of cantilever. It has a lot of gesture. It has negative space. And I did that so that for the demo, I can show you a bunch of stuff that's important. Yours does not have to be this flamboyant. I don't know. But I've obviously spent more time looking at this, looking at the angles, trying to get it into a shape that I want. Now notice my maquette is very rough. All of this is going to look really different. A bunch of stuff down here is going to be a little bit different. So just know this is just a sketch. Just a sketch. In order to make your core and build your sculpture, you are going to need several sheets of newspaper or paper. You're going to need clay. You are going to need a wearboard or something to build your work on, and a sheet, pillowcase, sheet of newspaper, something that goes between your work and the wearboard. You will need masking tape, preferably, and then any hand tools that you may need. Your clay shredder may come in handy, the serrated rib, fettling knife, and any ribbon tool that you may have. So small ribbon tool or large ribbon tool, those may come in handy when you start to actually form. Here I have my trusty little maquette. And again, this maquette is going to give me a better idea of where my angles are, where my weight is, and how it's going to lay on the table. This is also going to tell me what shape I need to make that initial core. So I'm going to be making a core out of newspaper so that when I do start to build this solid, that my clay doesn't start to slump. So if you just started with a brick of clay or a ball of clay that you've wedged, chances are when you start adding this stuff, your clay could slump. So that newspaper core is going to eliminate that from happening as much as possible. Now that newspaper core will be pulled out once we go and carve everything out. So newspaper core keeps it sturdy. Maquette is going to let us know what that shape of the original core needs to be. When I'm looking at my maquette and I'm considering the shape of my newspaper core, I want to not exclude these parts that are hanging off. So I'm not going to be considering all of these parts. I'm going to be considering where the bulk of my volume is. So remember, these should all have volumes. These shouldn't be flat. If you were going to do flat sculpture, you would do it in a different way. Building solid is good for things that have a volume to it. So I'm going to consider my shape based on this right through here. So I'm going to have an oval type of shape for my core. What I'm going to do is start with newspaper, and what I'm not going to do is start wrapping newspaper on top of each other like this. What I'm going to do is take balls of newspaper, or I should say sheets of newspaper that I put into a ball. And then I'm going to take multiple balls of newspaper and I'm going to put them together. I'm going to eventually hold them together with tape. It's better to do this because that newspaper is going to bulk up a little bit quicker, and it's also going to be pretty strong for your core. Now, you want to make your core obviously smaller than what you want your sculpture to be, but also know that as you are pressing the clay up against it, it is going to compress the paper, and your core is going to be smaller than what you're originally doing here. So I think that I'm going to go ahead and start with this much newspaper. So I have about 3 sheets, some of which were half sheets. And I'm just going to take masking tape or some kind of tape. Try to do a tape that can break down a little bit easier. Like a plastic tape isn't as good. I would much prefer more of a paper type of tape. And I'm just going to tape this together. What I wouldn't do is tape the heck out of it. Because when you go to carve this out and you go to pull your newspaper out, it's going to be a heck of a lot easier to pull out if you're not dealing with a whole bunch of tape. Believe me, this is experience speaking. Now I have my core. It doesn't look pretty right now, but that's okay. We don't need it to. I do have to say that the thin masking tape is much better than this kind of thicker painter's tape. This just happens to be what I have, so I'm going to use it. But whatever you have is what you have. And again, don't go crazy taping it all up. The less tape that you can use, the better when you go to actually pull the newspaper out later. As far as building a core for something that has a hole in it, you're going to make almost like a wreath, right? And this is going to be this area here. You may even want to build it this way, at least till things start to firm up, and then you could flip it. But you're going to want something shaped like this. And I made that just by taking newspaper and twisting it. That's going to be a lot easier than balling it up. So I just took a bunch of these twists and I stacked them together to get a core for something like this. If you feel like your work doesn't need a core, that means probably it doesn't have enough volume to meet project requirements or to be worth building solid. So your work should need a core. And something like this is going to need a core because when we scale it up, it is going to get heavy and you do want something in there. So this is one way of doing it. If your hole was way down here, and let's say this is super thin down here, let's say it was something like that, then maybe your core is only going to be, it's going to maybe look like a banana. So maybe that becomes your core. So whatever your shape is going to kind of determine what your core is going to look like. If you have something a little taller like this, then of course your core is going to be a little taller. It's going to be shaped more like this than round. It kind of depends on what you need. So remember, when you're making your core, use as little tape as you can, but still have it stick together. And if you could use masking tape, that's going to be a lot better than the tape that I have. This is the first step to your journey of building solid. So, your turn. Now for the fun part. We have our core, we have our clay, and you can literally just start taking your clay and slapping it on here. What you want to start doing is making a kind of ring around your paper to start. You see how I have this ring that is connected to itself? That's going to help keep that together. And now that I have that ring, I can go ahead and start filling in around the paper that way. Notice I don't care too much about what this is looking like right now because I've got a lot of work to do on this guy. The beauty of building solid is You can make however many mistakes you want because you can just keep on adding clay and taking clay away. So now I have this core, and I can come in here and beat it around at this point. My newspaper is going to crush into whatever shape I need that to happen. But this is where I really need to start looking at my maquette and, you know, start thinking what are the gestures here? Where are the lines here? You know, luckily it's small enough that I can turn it in my hand and figure things out. Now, working with your maquette, it's going to change. I've kind of mentioned that before. Let it change. Let your clay move with where, you know, let your clay do what it wants to do, right? Let your clay go where it wants to go, as long as you maintain some kind of control over your form. So that's kind of what I want to make sure that you're doing is maintaining some kind of control. Your work at the end should look something like this. And again, I gave you those examples, so we're going to keep on going. I'm just going to start adding clay like I think it needs to be added. And again, I can take away and I can put on. So I'm going to have at it. Right now, I am figuring out where my front is because that's also going to be important. And I'm going to start putting these areas in so that I have some sort of spatial recognition. Otherwise, I'm just dealing with a blob. So make sure you establish a front. Sometimes if you are starting to get confused, go to where your bottom is and just kind of mark it in some way, or mark it on the top, whatever you need to do. But if you need to establish that, go ahead and mark it. Keys are a good thing. We like keys. This is a very wet clay technique, so just make sure that your clay is very nice and wet. Right now, we don't need to slip and score. There is no slip and scoring right now. Right now, you are just smearing and making sure everything is relatively compressed. Now, once this starts to firm up a little bit, you are going to want to slip and score. And when I get to that point, I will show you that a little bit later. That's going to happen more when we have details going on. So I kind of have this started. You can start to see, I'm not in my gesture yet because I haven't put my legs on, but you can start to see that it's starting to have this form. So I'm going to start turning it around and start really getting this going a little bit better so that I can understand what I am dealing with. It's going to be rough for a while, and then suddenly it will all just start to come together, I promise. So I'm just going to keep on moving, and I will show you here and there what's going on. A few things. I'm still really at the beginning of this, right? But I wanted to show you, probably about right through here was my initial core, and I'm starting to add onto it. I'm starting to add these kind of appendage type things onto it. Now I'm starting to look at my angles. So right now I am focused on this angle here, and I'm trying to get the right gesture, right? I'm trying to get the right angle. Now I'm not there yet. But I wanted to show you. I'm going to start kind of pulling this out a little bit. Once I say, okay, that angle's looking pretty decent, it does not have to be perfect at this point, then I'll start turning and I'll start looking at the different angles to where by the time I am all the way around, I'll kind of know where I went wrong, right? Because you're going to go wrong. And that's when you're going to start kind of defining the form a little bit. So again, move with the clay, but use your maquette to guide you. Now, there's going to be a point where I am going to make these beautiful angles. Haven't done that yet, but I'm getting there. And I'm not going to want to place my clay down on this hard board because it's heavy. It's so heavy right now. So I'm going to need a piece of foam or whatever you have. This could be towels that are rolled up into a nest. It could be a pillow if you've got an old pillow, a dog bed, a cat bed, anything that is like this is going to work. That's going to help mold your work so that it doesn't flatten up when you start to actually, get this going and turning this around. Now, the last thing I'm going to do is this part here, right? I'm going to get all of this established and I'm going to hold off on this top part. It's really thin and the shape of this is going to depend on what this actually ends up turning out to look like. So I'm going to start it, right? I'm going to start kind of figuring out where it goes, but that will absolutely be the last thing that I do is that top part. This is almost impossible for you to see at this point, but I'm going to try to show you. We're looking at it kind of from this angle. So this is this right here. This is this right here. And it's only to about here, right? I don't have these parts on yet. I need to get those on yet because I'm about as far as I can go with this before I need to really understand what's happening here so I can get it into the position that it needs to be in. Now, the reason that I did one that has negative space like this is because I want to remind you that these little legs are never going to hold the weight of all of this clay. So you have to do the whole riser thing. Now, this clay is super wet, so it's going to be really important that you have paper between your riser and the clay. Now, what's funny about this at this point is that I don't really know how big my riser needs to be because I haven't figured that out yet. So I may have to add clay to the riser to get it up, or I may have to pull clay away to bring it down. But just know that you've got to have something under there that's going to be supporting your actual, anything that is holding all of this up in case yours does have something like that. The other thing that I'm starting to run into is that this guy is getting big and my board is just too darn small for that much clay, especially because at some point I'm going to have to start propping and I'm going to need room to prop. So I'm going to go ahead and grab a bigger board. At this time also I have to have my rag here. There's so much clay here that if you don't have something releasing, your work could get stuck to your board, and boy does that suck. You could have a sheet of newspaper or you could have a sheet, which I like a sheet a lot better because if I have to move this big guy around, I can pull my sheet and the whole thing will move. If I have a sheet of newspaper here, what do you think's going to happen to that wet newspaper with all this weight on it when you try to pull it? Exactly. It's just going to rip and then you're not going to be able to move it. And that's going to become important when you have to move your work to one area so that you can prop it, right? So now that we have all this weight, we really want to make sure that we're able to move this around without lifting it up if we have to. You may not have to do that, but just in case, if you got a sheet, use a sheet. If you don't, you don't. Oh, I wanted to show you, just to give you some idea of kind of what I'm doing to form this, because now I'm actually forming it. It depends on how much clay that I feel like I need to put on here, but your clay could be huge, right? You could put a huge piece of clay on, and once you put that on, you're just going to start pulling it and moving it around. And when I start actually forming this, and I look at my angles here, I'll come up and just kind of start really moving the clay in whatever direction I need the clay to move in. I don't care what happens up here, I can always take that off later. If I need more clay down here, I just put it on and I start blending and moving that clay wherever I need it to go. Right now, I've had to flip this upside down so that I can work on the bottom a little bit more, and that way I will know how big that riser needs to be. It's hard to work with it flipped up, trying to figure out what's happening down here. So I flipped it over. I'm working on the bottom, but then I also did want to tell you that sometimes your clay that you're making as a riser, with all of this weight, if you're making it this big, all of this weight is just going to smash the clay in. At that point, you can always use more paper if that helps. If you have foam blocks, you can use foam blocks. I have these in all different sizes. You could use sandbags. You could even use, you know, something that has more structure to it to put down there. Whatever you can do while you're building to get that up. Now, when it goes into the kiln, of course, that's going to be a clay riser. But right now, it doesn't have to be clay. So anything that you can use that has some kind of strength to it, that's not going to buckle under the weight of this, you're welcome to use any of that. You do what you can. And just to kind of let you know here, this is kind of what I'm dealing with. Now, if I let my hands go, this is going to completely fall out this way. So I don't want any weight on that. But this is the back of it, and it gives you a little bit of an idea of kind of where I am going with trying to get this going so that I know what I need to do under here. So that's going to be important. Okay. You see that it's starting to come together now. I have pretty much from here down pretty good to go. Now, again, I still have a lot of defining to do or refining to do. I'm going to let this firm up a little bit because the clay is just so wet. It's not wanting me to go any further. So I'm going to let this firm up, and then I am going to flip it again on its head or somewhere where it's not going to collapse, and start working on that bottom again, because there are a few things that I really want to start kind of defining and getting up in there. Right now I have the foam that's holding everything up, otherwise this would be collapsing. But you can see that I have got the beginnings of it. The gesture is starting to come together. None of this top is on, and that's going to really make a difference in the twisting of this. So it's kind of one thing at a time. And really, without my maquette, I don't know if I'd know where to start. You know what I mean? The maquette really helps because you're going to think, like, this doesn't look right. It doesn't look right. But if you just kind of follow that maquette and look at the lines and look at the profiles, there's truth in this. So make sure that you're looking at your maquette. There is going to be a point where you're like, oh my gosh, this is never going to look like I need it to look, especially if you're doing something this gestural, but it will come together. It will come together. There's one more thing I wanted to say about this. Oh, I don't remember. I'm sure I'll remember for next time. So right now, I'm just going to put plastic on this. I do still want it to dry slowly. Or firm up slowly. So I'm going to just put a sheet of plastic on it because I'll probably get back to it tonight. If I know I'm going to let it go for a few days, go ahead and wrap it up really good like usual. And then when I do come back to it, if things are firm, like if they're kind of leathering up, I am going to start slipping and scoring, and I just wanted to say that out loud now just in case I forget to later. One more thing too, you know, if you're losing your form because all of this junk is in the way, remember your serrated rib. Your serrated rib will kind of help you look at that form. And you eventually, anyway, are going to want to serrate the heck out of this thing because you're building it so haphazard when you're just slapping clay on. But this also is going to help to form. I don't want you to forget about your wonderful serrated rib tool. But you can see coming together one little step at a time. Here I have my work flipped over and I am dealing with the bottom now. One really nice trick about how to make sure your negative space is how you want it, and you know whether or not you have to add to your feet or not, is to take a board and put it, find the bottom, put it on the bottom and start looking through here, right? So you can start looking, and it's hard for you all to see. I don't know if I can. Yeah, we're not gonna try that. It's hard to for you to see, but I'm able to get exactly what I want here. I'm able to get exactly what I want through here. I'm able to see how this is touching, how this is going to touch the ground or touch the table. So this is a real nice trick. This is also going to come in handy when I build my riser, which I'm about to do here in a minute. But I wanted to show you that good trick. Another thing I want to talk to you about real quick is what happens when you go to your form is running into paper, because you've got that paper core. If that happens to happen, you're actually just going to take your fettling knife. We're just going to pretend here that that's happening. You're just going to take your fettling knife and kind of cut out the clay around it, and then just take your knife and press the paper in, because you need it to get out of your way. You don't want to, especially if you're trying to eliminate clay there, you need to get that paper out of your way. If it's really bad and you have a long way to go, you might actually want to cut the whole thing out. No big deal, right? No big deal. And start pulling some of that paper out so that you can do what you need to do. Hopefully that won't happen to you. So now you've got this hole, right? And this could be a various size hole. You're just going to want to do the plug thing and go ahead and stick that in there. And then of course you see all my serrated marks because I love my serrated tool. And I'm just going to compress all that clay in there where I made that plug. Now that I have a better understanding of what my negative space is here, now I can make my riser, and I am going to make it right up against here so that when it's in the kiln, it is being supported everywhere. I am almost going to do this like I've built this sculpture, just by taking clay and smashing it to where it's actually going against my work where I need it to go against my work. That way, if I need to create a little cradle for it, I'm able to do that. This will make a little bit more sense, I think, when it's actually standing on its other side, or upright, I should say. Notice I have that paper in between. I don't want to smash this against my clay right now because it will stick. And just in case I forget to say later, this riser is also going to be hollowed out once it's firmed up, so don't forget to do that. I'm just going to come in here and continue to mold this in here together. Use my board. When all of my bottom is touching, then I know my riser is good to go. Now, once you get this done, you have to let this firm up before you can flip it back over. Because remember, these feet are really, really not going to take the weight of this guy. All right, my riser is done. It's in place. It's going to mold to my body here. And one other thing, if you're worried about being able to fit it back in the right place, you can always put a key on it, right? So I'm just going to take my knife or needle tool or some tool and just kind of put a key. I don't care that there's a dent in this right now because I have plenty of things to do. Now, once this firms up, I can always put a key kind of underneath where the audience can't see it so that I can end up cleaning this up. But for now, I'm pretty happy with just a little key. I don't think you can see it. A little mark so that I know that that's where it goes back on. I do keep a newspaper between it the whole time until it starts to become leather hard. Then I'm not quite as worried about having that newspaper there. So another thing I wanted to talk about are tools. Once you're getting this rough shape, so my bottom is pretty much done. I could definitely go in and do a few more things to it once I get the rest of it going, but it's looking pretty good. I went in and I was looking at angles, and I was using my ribbon tool, the large ribbon tool. I was using my fettling knife, and I was using that small wire tool, well, not, it's a regular size wire tool. I was using the wire tool to go in there and kind of start shaving things away. Some of it I needed to cut a lot, so I would use the knife to cut stuff away to make sure that those angles and those turns are exactly what I want. So your tools are going to be important here. You can use your hands and dig, but sometimes your tool is much more efficient. The other thing I wanted to say about this is it's important that you are constantly moving around, right? So you've got your maquette. If you're working on this leg and it doesn't look right, that's okay. Move along, because what you're doing back here could change that. Don't get stuck on one area. That's my biggest advice. Don't get stuck on one area. It will work out once you go. And it's pretty easy to get hung up because you can't figure out what's wrong with it. So that can be annoying, but just keep going around, and eventually it will all come together. Once this firms up, I'm gonna put it on its bottom again and get it right side up. I am going to continue doing the body of it before I do any of this top. I want to mention now that that top, because it's a little more fragile, I am not going to do that until all of this is exactly how I want it. Now that doesn't mean it has to be cleaned up beautifully or anything like that, because we're not going to clean this up until we cut it apart, carve it out, and then put it back together again. There's no point in making this look beautiful right now when we could potentially cut through it, carve through it, spike needle tool through it. So don't worry about that too much. If you have work that has little spikes that are about this size and it's all over the form, let's say, don't put those on until you carve out and put it back together. Same with little details. It's going to be a pain to have to deal with cutting your work in half if you've got something like this in the way, and you don't want to cut through something like this. This is too small. It doesn't need carved out, so you don't have to worry about the carving process when you have little things like this. So I would kind of leave these toward the end when you put it back together. Now, if it's crucial and you need them to understand your piece, or they're a part of the work that you really need to have happen, go ahead and put them on. It's always better to put them on when the clay is at the same state because of the whole shrinkage thing. So if you can put them on, go ahead. But if it is going to be a problem with you handling the piece, carving it out, having to cut through something like this, don't do it. You can wait. Don't put your details on. Don't put your texture in. You don't need that, okay? If you're doing any lines or any sgraffito, that's going to happen later. Right now, we are just concentrating on getting the whole form done. When I flip this over, I'm going to see about that piece I'm putting at the top. That might be something that I make and not even really attach. I don't know yet, because I want to make sure that I can easily cut this apart and do what I need to do. So the next time that I see you here, I am going to have this ready to cut apart. I think I told you everything you kind of need to know. A lot of it, you're going to have a completely different form than this. So a lot of it is just going to be you figuring out how to work the clay. But I think you have enough tips to get you through to the point where you need to start carving out. Do not, I'm going to say this a few times if I remember, do not carve this out, do not cut it until it is leather hard. Do not cut this until it is leather hard. It has to be firm before you cut it. Otherwise, it's just going to want to collapse and you're going to lose your form, right? If this was really wet and I'm putting pressure to it and I'm carving out, I'm going to lose everything that I've done. So there's going to be a weird thing there. It can't be too hard, leather hard, right? Or you're not going to be able to cut it and carve it, and you're still going to have texture and designs to put on there. So there's going to be a little sweet spot, which is going to be about soft, leather hard. You're going to want to cut this apart. Have fun, and I will see you when this guy's ready. Or maybe this is a girl. This might be a girl, actually. This gal. Have fun. In order to carve your work out, you're going to need the following tools. You're going to want a fettling knife, needle tool, ribbon tool, and this is a small ribbon tool, large ribbon tool, and if you have any other shapes or sizes of ribbon tools, they come in handy. And I will explain more about a ribbon tool if you're not sure what that is in the actual presentation. And you're going to need a scoring tool. You are going to need foam or a pillow or some type of cushion, towels, whatever you need to cushion your work. You are also going to need patience. Few things have happened since the last time you saw this gal. First, before I get into moving forward, I want to go back a little bit and I want to show you a few things that I want to make sure that you're aware of as you're building your work. Because I've talked about kind of where you put in detail or when you put in detail, and I just want to show you what this looked like before I started putting all of these articulations in. So you'll notice in this photo that there are areas that just the whole body is one. So these kind of leggy parts go into that top part without any division. And you can see that I've started to actually put the divisions in. So you can kind of see what that looks like. Also, in this picture, you can see that I am doing a lot of giving and taking. I'm pulling a lot of clay off. I'm putting a lot of clay on. This for me is just as much of an additive process as it is a subtractive process. That doesn't mean that it has to be that way for you. It's just the way that I work because it's how I control my lines. It's how the sculpture develops for me. So I've said that, we've got the maquette here, and the maquette's just kind of a way to go. If you're the type of person that wants to get your maquette and you're looking at this and you're like, yes, this is exactly what I want it to look like, you can absolutely do that. And there was a point where this sculpture looked just like this maquette. The thing with me is that if I make a maquette and I know it's exactly what I want it to be at the end, I'm probably not going to actually build the big thing. Because, one of the beauties for me about clay is that I can listen to it, it can talk to me, I can kind of move with it as it grows. And so that's what happened here. It happened here a little more drastically than usual, probably because the form itself is a little drastic. And when I was making the maquette, there were things that I didn't love. But for demos, I was in a rush. One of the things, though, that was always kind of bothering me was that it was kind of spilling out this way, and I really wanted this to reach up. And you can see that as I started building, I really wanted this. I wanted this to reach up. I wanted to give it this levity. And because of that, it changed what was happening here. From the beginning, this profile down here was always a little bit too low, but if the work was going to be more spread out, then it didn't matter as much. But the second that I started putting this up, I really then wanted to start raising this up. I wanted to start pulling some of the clay out of these areas. And so that's what I've done. Now you can imagine that by doing that, I'm running into some trouble with my newspaper core. So that's what I want to show you now. First, I want to just reiterate that your maquette is a jumping off point. This is where you start, but let go of it, right? Do what needs to happen visually once you get to this point. So that's kind of what's happening here, and you can see I've got a little prop here. The other thing I want to talk about is this prop, which really doesn't feel like I need it as much as I thought I was going to. It really is kind of functioning okay without the prop, but I definitely put a prop in there. This is just a soft brick with a little piece of wedged clay there. You can see that in the propping video. I go into a little bit more about props, but this is showing you that this isn't going to fall over, and probably when I go into the kiln and fire it, I will keep that prop in there. But I want to show you here, look at what's happening. All right, see what's happening? I am carving through to my newspaper core, and I've actually pulled a lot of that newspaper out, but I think what I want to do now is let's get this cut in half, because I know that once I get it where I want it and I can see what's happening down there, and this is lighter, I will be able to just take a slab of clay and form it how I want to down there. Right now there's a lot of stuff in the way that I don't like. Once I get the weight off of this, I'll be able to take my prop out because these are firm, or my riser. Now I will put that back into fire and I will always store it in there, but at least to build, I can kind of pull that out and kind of do what I need to do down there now that things have changed a little bit. So that's going to be my next step. And I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid to do that, right? Because at this state, I can still cut away, I can still add, I can still do whatever I want to do. Another reason that I've decided to kind of lighten up on some of this down here visually, because my maquette is kind of thick through here. I know that this up through here is going to be highly pierced, like lace almost. So I know that visually all of this information is going to be really light, and I felt like keeping it this heavy down here was just going to pull the whole sculpture down. And if you know anything about placements of volume or how things sit on the table, they have a different feel. So if I want this to feel like it is growing, or that it is lifting up, or that it is light, I need to get some of that weight off of the bottom to give it that. And because this is at such a drastic angle, it doesn't make sense for me to have it heavy down here. So that's why I've made some of the decisions that I've made, you know, just kind of some things to start thinking about as you are doing it. I'm not totally sure exactly what's going to happen here. Things are starting to formulate, but this kind of gives you a good idea about the direction that I'm going in. So the other thing that I'm a little concerned about is because of this angle here, I'm concerned that this isn't going to be enough to hold it up without it wanting to tip over, because my cantilever is so far over this way. So far it's good, but I've got this riser in place. Once I pull that riser out, what's going to happen? And if it means that I have to put something else down here, I'm going to figure that out as I go. So we will see what happens with that. Just something to say, tripod is always good, right? 3 points of contact are always good. So hopefully we've got what's going on. I also know, or we've got enough going on here for it not to tip. I also know that this is going to be a lot lighter once I start piercing through it, and I'm hoping that the weight of these areas down here are going to also stabilize it a little bit. So those are just some things that I'm thinking. I'm going to pull the riser out and I am going to start cutting this. So let's talk about that. When I'm thinking in terms of cutting this up, when do you start actually cutting is the first thing you want to start thinking about. You can see here that I have a lot of this information already in. You don't know where I'm going with this, so it's a little bit hard for you to see. I know that this still has a lot of cleanup and a lot of body that I'm still going to put in it. So this is going to be very carved, and it's going to look a little bit different by the time I'm done with it. But I do want to get this cut. I want to get the weight out of here, and I want to finish that bottom, and I want to be able to start working on this. So I want to get it cut, I want to get it carved, and I want to get it put back together so that I can start finishing it up. So when you get to a point where you know that you're really not going to be adding any more clay to it, and that if any carving that you're going to do is relatively minimal, remember you can always fix it if you go through. But right, basically, and that's going to happen, by the way, I feel confident that I'm not adding any more bulk to it. And if I am going to do any more carving in, it's going to be minimal. So I'm negating any real problem in the future. Now, I still have a long way to go as far as cleaning up the surface and putting the detail in it. So I am going to go ahead and cut this now. I'm ready to cut this. When I think about cutting, I'm going to think about the best place to cut that doesn't deal with anything that has a lot of detail in it, and also a place that I can get to every part. So I could consider cutting it like this so that I could get down into my legs, or I could consider cutting it like this. But if I cut it down like this, I may not be able to get down into these legs. So I do feel like I am going to have to cut it in half this way, and I'm probably going to go ahead and come down through here and cut it here. Now, it is possible, once I really look at this and think about it, that I might have to cut my legs off here so that I can get into these parts of my legs. So depending on how complex your work is going to kind of determine on how many times you have to cut. Of course, the less cutting that you can do, the better, but when you have to cut more, it's really not a big deal. It will go together again just fine. So this is going to be kind of a real-time situation here. I'm not real sure exactly where I should cut this. So I'm just kind of looking at my angles. I do not have to cut a straight line. I can kind of go around things if I have to go around things. So let's see. So I'm going to kind of make a line where I feel like I am going to go ahead and cut this. Okay, I'm pretty confident with that line. So that is how I'm going to cut this in half. I still may have to cut these off. I'm not sure. I'm going to see how far I can get down. But I feel like with this line, I should be able to get down pretty good. I should be able to get up pretty good. And it will be pretty easy to put it back in order. Now, what I am going to do is make some pretty good key marks, knowing that I can fill those in later, just so I know where to put this back together. And I'm going to do that in a few areas so that I am able to put this together. Now, when you go to cut this, you are going to want foam so that you can put this down, or pillowcase, or a pillow or towels, whatever, because you want to make sure that you can put this down on something and it's not going to smash in any way. So make sure you grab your foam, which I'm going to do right now. So I've got my foam, and I got a few different size blocks of foam just in case I need to stuff something underneath an area to stop it from collapsing. I'm not too worried about collapsing at this point because I am leather hard. I'm even maybe a little bit hard leather hard. And just to kind of give you a reminder, when I was working on this, I was literally spraying it every 5 to 10 minutes because it's starting to firm up, and I do not want it to firm up. So get in that habit of spray, spray, spray. Now, this might take a minute, right? Because first I have to cut through to my newspaper core, and then once I've actually cut through, that paper's holding things together. So we do our best here. Sometimes it's nice to have a friend to help you out with this part. Now, when I go to cut, what I'm not doing is cutting back and forth. That every time you cut in and then cut back out, you're going down a different path, right? And you don't want to do that. The other thing you do not want to do Unless you know that you can cut straight through something to the other side, you do not want to take your cutoff wire and cut in, because remember that you have newspaper in there that's going to stop this from going all the way through. So the second that you hit that newspaper core and you come back out, it's going to cut a huge chunk of it out because it's not going to follow the same path. I promise you, not going to follow the same path. So we're just going to take our fettling knife and we are going to probably in a few passes just start cutting along our line. I am not trying to cut all the way to the newspaper just yet. Eventually that will happen. So I've gone around one pass, and I'm going around another one. I'm going to keep on doing this until I'm through. And I am going to try to follow the same path. There's going to be a point where there may be areas, like I've cut all the way through here. So now I need to maybe focus on my front. I am also really holding on to my work because I really don't want it to fall over. And now I kind of know that if I take this is thin through here, so if I take my knife all the way through, I can kind of start slicing down like that. Perfect. Oop, I screwed up a little bit right there. So you can see I didn't follow my same path. Oh, bad. That whole piece is going to have to be replaced. And that's okay. That is okay. Oop, so I'm completely cut through my back. I can feel the newspaper in there. So now I'm going to focus on this area here. I'm going to go ahead and pull that out. I don't even want that there. I already know I've got some work to do. All right, pulling this apart. You can see all the carving I need to do there. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to put this on my foam. And I'm going to support it if I have to. Go ahead and support it like that. And then now I'm able to pull my newspaper out of this part if I can get it out. You will have newspaper that sticks. That's okay. The newspaper will just burn out. We don't really want that in our kiln, but the newspaper will just burn out. And you are also going to be carving. Okay, now you're able to see where your thick areas are or if you have any thin areas. Once I get this carved out, I'm going to talk about what happens with thin areas and all of that. But right now, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get carving. I'm going to take my ribbon tool, my small ribbon tool, and my large ribbon tool. Now remember, the ribbon tools are the ones that are flat, that have that little beveled edge, that is good for carving out. That is different than a wire tool, which is like a guitar string type of wire. That they may look the same, but this is wire and rounded. This is better for carving surface. This is better for like actually removing clay. So this is what you're going to want to use to carve out. And I'm just going to come in here, and I know that I want that 1/4 of an inch, right? I want to keep that 1/4 of an inch. All of this stuff that's coming out, I'm going to put in a nice little pile, because it may even be okay to use now, right? It may be, I may be able to just wedge that up and actually use that now. If you go through your work, that's okay. It's so fixable right now. So you do want to be careful. I'm not saying not to be careful, but right now, just don't worry too much about it. It's always good to have your hand on the other side of where you're carving so you don't carve through. There's a weird area here that I probably just went a little bit too far in, but you're gonna, it's when you're using your fingers to kind of come in here and feel how deep you have to go. So I'm gonna show you a little bit about what that looks like here as I'm starting to carve. And I'm gonna go ahead and get going on this, and when it's looking pretty good, I will show you that. So you don't need to watch this. You have an idea of what's going on here. A few things have happened that I want to show you, but first, notice my stuff is wrapped. Especially now that I'm getting all that wet clay out, it's really important that you wrap because things are going to start drying up quickly. So my first piece is here, the top is there. This is the piece that I'm working on, and I had it wrapped while I was working on one of the little legs. But I want to show you a few things. First off, while I'm working, I do have wet rags because these little guys are really starting to firm up, and I don't want them to get any firmer than they are. So those are just damp cloths that I kind of have over. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that because I want to show you a few things here. First off, I can't get down into here. It's not going to happen. Let's see what you can see. Not much. Okay. So I can only get so far into there. And that means I am going to have to cut off these legs and carve to where I can't get to. And it's a good practice. I'm going to go ahead and mark pretty much that is all solid. So I kind of know where to cut. And then this one is about right here. So even if I just cut out, about that, I can get into each side and put that on. What I'm looking at right now is what can I get away with cutting once it's all back together. And I can see that if that's my line, I know that I could cut right here and get into this spot and this spot from that cut. And notice that's not bearing any weight. So I can go ahead and do that later, which is definitely what I want to do. Same here. I know that if I cut right here, there's no weight on it. So I can go ahead and carve out the areas from both sides. Now again, you have up to about 1 inch thick before you really have to worry about it. But I just want to show you, I'm leaving those right now and I'm going to carve those out later. Now, this guy in the back here, look at all the weight that is bearing. So I know that I absolutely cannot cut that later because I don't want that extra weight here. And then cut this off because there's nothing to hold this. So right now, while I don't have that extra weight, I went ahead and I just propped it up. I went ahead and cut, and I went ahead and I hollowed this part out. And I hollowed that out all the way to about there. I'm not worried about this little tip here. And then this gets pretty thin anyway. So I just want you to notice how I've hollowed that out. And then I can come in here and also hollow this part out, which I haven't done yet. So I'm going to go ahead and hollow this until it hits the hole on the inside, which is not too far in. So let me go ahead and just do that so you can see what I'm talking about. This little piece is hanging on by not much. The top of the sculpture kind of holds this together. I have reinforced it a little bit on areas that the viewer can't see, so it would be areas inside, just because it's such a weird area. Now when that bottom goes on, that bottom's going to also stabilize it, so I'm not too concerned at this point. But I did kind of wrap a coil around here because it's pretty thin through here and I don't have that bottom on yet. And so it's not a big deal. I just put a little bit of clay through here to stabilize that because you can see it's kind of wiggly right there. So now you can see that that's been hollowed out. When I go to put this on, there's going to be airflow between the two parts, so no trapped air. and that's going to go ahead and be slipped and scored with a coil in between back together. Now, something really important, and another reason why I'm doing this now, I want that seam to firm up before I put the weight of the rest of the sculpture on. So this is kind of a right away sort of thing. I'm not gonna go carve my top while this hasn't been reattached yet, because that seam is going to be really important to hold the weight. And I'm probably going to go ahead because of that and keep this under here for now. And maybe depending on what happens at the bottom, I may end up needing a support that goes in the kiln there, but I'm not real sure yet. So we will just see how this goes, but I'm going to go ahead and slip and score. The other thing that I'm going to talk about later, but I just want to mention now, you can see that I have all of my holes piercing the skin, and I'll tell you about that why later. Just want you to see that I did do that because it'd be crazy not to. So here we go. Now, as you can see, we are nice and carved out. You can also see that I carved right through there. I'm going to fix that before I ever put it together because I have the opportunity of dealing with it from the inside. So if I have that opportunity, I'm definitely going to take it. What I'm going to do is slip and score as usual and take a plug shape as usual and push that through, knowing that I can easily get to it and clean it up from the other side. But what I like is that I know that that seam, that hole, that the clay has actually gone way beyond that hole on the inside, because then I can do the same thing to the outside. I'm also using the same clay that came out of the middle because it's kind of at the same state, right? So it's a really good match to come in and do that. So now it's gonna look kind of funny on the outside for a while, but that's okay. When I flip it over and I put everything together, I will fix it then, and no problems there. The other thing, I'm about ready to put my two sides back together again, but what I need to do first is start putting holes in my surface here. I'm doing that for several reasons. One is just to let the air flow freer. It's going to make my walls a little bit more even because I'm definitely dealing with a little bit of fluctuation. The other reason is air pockets, right? So we're just trying to eliminate air pockets if we can. And we're just going to do that by taking either the scoring tool, or for parts that you can't get to, you can go ahead and use that needle tool. And again, if you go through, not a big deal, you can fix that. But you know, we've really built this wonky, we've really built this, you know, we're just slapping clay on, and you'll notice when you are carving that you're going through air pockets. So hopefully with all the compressing you did at the surface and how all the compressing you will continue to do as you clean this up is going to help all that. But you know, better safe than sorry. You're going to get in here and you're going to put holes all the way through it. Once those holes are on, I am going to score extremely deep, right, as usual, and I am going to put a slip in my score marks, a wet coil, and I will do that. I will slip and score the other side, and then I will put it together. As far as kind of gauging how thick my wall is as you're carving, at first it's a little bit hard to tell. So you just kind of keep carving until you can actually feel. And the more clay you take out, the more you're going to be able to understand, you know, how thick those walls are. The most important thing is that they're even. So if you feel like a real thick spot, try to get in there and get the clay out. Now, areas that are kind of coming off, like if you have a point coming off, those aren't quite as important, right? Because the air can flow around them from the outside as well. So you don't have to really go up into a part that looks like this. But you do have to try to get up to at least through here. And you're just going to do that by flipping things around and just kind of feeling as you start to pull the clay out. In order to clean up your work, you need your cleanup tools. I've got a bunch of tools laid out here right now, but you're not going to need them all and you're not going to have them all either. But let me go through these really quickly. You should not need a clay shredder at this point, but your clay shredder is a part of a cleanup tool. You should not need that tool. You also may not need a scoring tool or slip because you are probably finished with adding anything to it. But just know if you do have to add any clay, you are going to slip and score and you're going to need everything that comes along with that. Your wooden modeling tool helps push all those seams in. Your serrated rib is the one with teeth. That's going to help clean up your surface and get rid of all of the dents. So you're going to want to start here. Then you could go into your metal rib and then your rubber rib to kind of clean the surface up further. But before you go to the extreme of especially the rubber rib and your sponges, you may want to go in and start carving, and that's where your wire tools are coming in. Wire tools come in all different shapes and sizes. And I have a bunch of different shapes and sizes to meet any need that I could possibly have. So wire tools, you are going to want your sponges at this point and your brushes at this point. These are the final things that you do is when you kind of start applying water and you use either finishing rubbers or rubber ribs. There's also these little finishing rubbers that come in different shapes here that you may like, and then your brushes are going to get into all of those little spots that you cannot reach into. And again, this is on that cleanup video, but I just want to show you the gamut here. I will also be briefly talking about these serrated tools that are really handy and I pretty much couldn't live without. But these are basically what you're going to use to finish up this project. Here I have my very messy looking work. It's been hollowed out. I have put holes in the inside. I have fixed anything that I can from the inside because I do want to do that. And I have slip and scored both sides and I put a wet coil on. Now I'm gonna use my keys to try to fit this back together and just make sure that you're still supporting stuff at this point. And then while I'm doing this, I want to talk about this wet coil and how I'm putting this together. I do the wet coil method between the work because I feel better about that. But just know that some people will just slip and score, put the work together, and then take the wire tool and cut a trench where that seam is, and then put a reinforcing coil in that seam. So that is another way of doing it. And I don't really know because I don't usually do it that way. I don't know which way is better. Because I don't have my bottom, and you can see how I'm losing a bunch of information here that's going to help kind of hold this up, I am definitely going to get in here with my prop and make sure that I've got something here to prop this up. Looks like my riser's in the way right now. So let me move this. And prop that. So that's holding all this up. So I feel pretty safe about that. And now I can go around and really make sure that everything is together. Because a lot of the weight is going this way, it's going to be really important that I kind of pull the work up toward the front and really get those seams compressed, and I'm just going to keep going around and around until I feel like I'm good to go. And then remember, once you've got this ugly seam poking out, you are not, or ugly coil I should say, you are not going to push it in until it firms up a little bit, because that's what's going to make that seam stronger. And again, some people, they don't use the wet coil. They take a ribbon tool, they slip and sew it together, and then they make a trench all around where the seam was, and then they come in with a coil and put a coil in there. I just want you to know that that is a way that people do it. Again, I don't know which way is best, but those are two different options for you. Either way, you are cleaning up a coil, right? Either way, you're cleaning up a coil. Okay. As promised, I have cut off the ends of my little leggy things, and I have hollowed them out. I've put holes in the interior to alleviate any possibilities of air pockets, and to better my airflow. And I have slipped and scored with a coil in between. I'm going to put them back together. Here I have them put back together. Look at that nasty coil sticking out. Yes, I'm going to wait. I'm going to wait. And then when that coil is firm, I'm going to push that coil in with the wooden modeling tool. That is the tool that I like to use. And then I always serrate my coils. So my seams are serrated with the serrated rib. Remember, the serrated rib should be part of your cleaning because it's actually going to smooth out your surface. It's going to pick up high points and deposit clay in low points. So always serrate your surface. It's also compressing your walls just a little bit more, and we want that. Another thing I wanted to show you, notice in this image that my entire sculpture is wrapped up except for the exposed foot. I will work on my sculptures like this. I only have exposed what I'm actually working on. This is going to help keep the sculpture moist, because the last thing I want to do is have it dry out. Once it becomes leather hard, it's going to want to dry. It's going to want to dry, and it's going to want to dry, and it's going to want to dry really fast, especially if you have thin parts. So anything that's kind of protruding from your main body, you're going to notice it wants to dry. So always keep your work covered even while you're working on it, if you are able to do that. Sometimes you do need to kind of look at the whole thing to figure some things out, but for the most part, you are only uncovering what you are actually working on. I'm going to make this quick because you guys already know how to clean up because you've seen the cleanup video. But I wanted to go over just a few quick things. So first off, I had just shown you an image of having this wrapped up all the time. You can see that I've started to work on these parts up here. These are going to start drying so fast. So it's really important that if I'm working down here, that I keep especially this stuff under control. Otherwise, it gets really bad. Now, I know because I have to start my next video that I'm probably not going to get back to this guy for weeks. So she's going to end up going in my damp box until I can get back to finishing this. So this will not be finished anytime real soon, but I did want to show you just a few things about cleanup. You already know that serrated rib is the way to go, but what you don't know about are these serrated hand tools. These come in all different shapes and sizes. I've got a bunch of them. I've got so many of these tools. You know why? You know why I have so many of these tools? Because I can't live without them. They are so wonderful. Now, it's a little advanced. Like for a beginner, don't go running and buying these tools, right? But if you like to carve, you want these tools. So they're just serrated hand tools. I believe you can find them in the wax, like a sculpture place that deals with wax. I know that originally that's where they kind of came from. I think more and more now you're able to find these tools at a ceramics store, but they're initially for like forming wax. They're so wonderful. Now they are stainless steel, which means they kind of don't rust, but they're also like $16 and $20 a tool. So just know they're expensive, but I've had these for years. My teeth are starting to kind of wear down a little bit, but not much for as long as I've had them. And these work just like a serrated rib, where you're able to kind of come in and really start forming and defining. And my entire sculpture will look like these tiny little serrated areas before I go in and start cleaning them up. The good thing about these little guys is that they will clean up with a regular rib. Let me find my... They will clean up with just a rib here. So that looks real nice. So I just wanted to show you those tools. I also wanted to talk about the cleanup, or the like at this stage, this is when I switch from my my ribbon tools to my wire tools, because my wire tools are what is good for carving into surface and making details. So all of this stuff up here was made from my wire tools, because they're not going to cut and gouge out too much clay. So they're much more gentler and much more gentle. So they also come in different shapes and sizes. I have a whole set of these little tiny ones. I don't know, I couldn't live without these guys, because they're gonna really get into these tiny little parts up here that nothing else can get into. So these are my carvers, and these really only work when we're looking at like hard leather. Hard is the best time to carve. So your carving tools, and that's what I've done here. And then the next step after I've kind of done all my carving is to take water and a sponge and start kind of smoothing out all of those tool marks. And then after that, I can use my fingers, which make a beautiful rubber rib, or I can use an actual rubber rib. The softer, the better. So if you're doing the mud tools that have that wonderful hole in them, the red is where you want to go. If you're using just kind of a regular rib, you're going to want to stick with that blue. This is going to be the softer one. Now, the red is much softer than this blue, just so you know. But if you're kind of going with the blue one, but man, if you can get your hands on these wonderful Cheryl mud tools, oh my gosh, they're so great. So that's kind of what I do. Also, there are these little things that, you know what, I can't think of what they're called right now, but they're like these little finishing rubber things that they're like a rubber rib with a different shape. And if you really had to come in here and start cleaning up in some of these spaces, maybe this rubber tipped tool will help you do that. Man, so that's kind of what those are used for. And then of course, final clean after you've sponged and ribbed. Also notice I've got lots of different sizes of sponges, right? Because I need to get in there. So lots of different sizes of sponges. But after I sponge and rib, that's when I go in with a semi-wet. I'm not drenching it. I don't want all that water on my brush. But then I can go in there on my brush, and I can come into all of these little spaces and really start smoothing out spaces that I can't get to, which is really good for things like eyes and nose and stuff like that. Like any kind of crease that you have, you're going to want to deal with just plain water with a wet brush. And know that the second it gets slippy, so if I come in here and I start, brushing this, I get a lot of slip on my brush. I want to make sure that I'm not accumulating that on my brush. I want my brush to always be just kind of clean with water. And for now, I think that's it. Now, we don't want to let these dry really fast. If I were to just let this hang out it's going to be dangerous, especially for this top part that I still have some carving to do, and it's going to get even thinner. So this particular piece, because of this part right here, I will probably let it dry for a month with just plastic draped over it. I want it to dry very slowly. Now in a studio or a project situation, you're not always going to have that luxury, right? So at that point, you just drape the plastic before you completely take it off. There's also wax that can be used, which I've talked about in another video. So these really delicate parts up here, I may come back in here with wax just to make sure that it does not dry faster than this. Because if this dries faster than this, there's a good chance that kind of where the two thicknesses meet, you're gonna get a crack there because this is shrinking and this is not. So those are really important things to think about. Before this goes into the kiln, I will get rid of any newspaper I have that's between like my riser or my props. But again, my props are going to end up staying in the kiln with the work. That is temporary. They will come out later, so you're not slipping and scoring any of this on. That's why the newspaper's there, to make sure that they don't adhere together. But eventually those will come out. But I want them for my support while my work is green. And again, that's anything up until bisque. Greenware is anything up until bisque. So I think that's it for the cleanup. Yeah, so one of these days, I'll get back to this gal. That is it. So good luck, have fun. Building solid is awesome.